Yes. And I believe it might have gone. Okay, so Madam Clerk, we are live. Live, we have one attendee and we have our delegation. So I'll introduce Brenda Lolley, the Public Library Chair here at the LTI, and she's here to report in regards to what's been going on in the library. Go ahead, Ms. Lolley.
Oh, good evening, Your Worship, and councillors. Thank you for having me here. I have sent a copy of my presentation. I hope you've all got it. Would you like me to go through it, or do you just want to sort of ask questions about it?
I think that if you want to give us the high points,
Okay.
We all received the presentation. It was in our package, so we have had a chance to review it.
Thank you.
Maybe there were some things that you'd like to point out. The highlights.
Okay. Okay. Well, the first part was the report on the council motion from June, which was looking at the possibility of integrated services within the libraries of the community, with the hope that that might create efficiencies. I did have an opportunity to speak to the chair of the Brockville Public Library, the Rideau Lakes Public Library, and the Gananoque Public Library. We have spoken on other occasions about different library matters. Brockville chair did not feel that there would be a reasonable fit, as they are geographically quite distant from us. So they didn't see how a form of amalgamation would probably work. We do have, as I believe we had given you information earlier, about various shared services having to do with cataloging and book purchasing and things of that nature. The Rideau Lakes chair, they discussed this at their board. They have some changes happening within their library system, and they weren't particularly interested in starting any other joint ventures at this point. Sealy's Bay and Lyndhurst used to be part of their library prior to amalgamation in 2001. The people in Gananoque, the chair, was interested, and Pierre Mercier, who's vice chair of our library board, and I met with the chair, Marion McLeod, and the vice chair, Chris McDonald. And we had a very, I think, useful discussion. We've decided that closer connections are probably a useful thing to do, and we're going to look at trying to develop more linkages with our programs and special collections and various shared services. The concern was that historically there has not been a good fit in joint ventures between the township and the town, and that was considered to be a bit of a stumbling point. So at this point, we are not looking at anything sort of close to an amalgamation, but we'll be considering closer ties and looking at, working on that and possibly discussing it into the future. So that was to address the motion in June. I just wanted to mention that the strategic plan, we have reviewed several candidates, and we have the board voted to go with the Southern Ontario Library Services consultant, Peggy Malcolm. She did the strategic plan with Rideau Lakes, and they were very pleased with how that had worked out. We felt that this would be a very much more cost-effective way to approach a strategic plan. Some of the companies that we spoke with were extremely expensive, and we also felt that it would be a lot more library specific, so it would be more useful as a strategic plan. She would not be doing the survey portion of it, so we were looking at hiring a survey company to do the survey for the strategic plan, but also hopefully to develop some system to have ongoing survey capacity so that we could be continuing to understand what our patrons need and how they feel. The library, when the COVID shutdown was announced, we discussed how best to cope with the fact that we were shut down, and we did lay off 3 of our staff. They were all part-time, as most of our staff is, and they were on layoff from mid-April until the end of August. The library continued working, providing services through the internet, curbside pickup for print material, DVDs, and other virtual activities. There was a fair tick in increase in library card requests so that people could access web-based material and internet material. The retained employees were working from home, and for a while they were also working in the branches, one person at a time, doing cataloging, inventory, and other sort of tasks that seem to have, you know, difficulty getting around to when we're fully open. I did submit that little table to show that there have been some cost savings because of these measures, and that will affect the 2020 budget. We don't quite know how all of those will work. There were cost savings because of the temporary layoff of staff. There were probably a few cost loss or revenue loss because of the fact that no fines will be charged during this period of time. And we are going to extend that no fine issue till the end of the year, just because there's been such a lot of disruption. The library now has opened. All the branches are open for regular hours, but 30 minutes before the regular hours and 30 minutes at the end have been reserved for cleaning and making sure that everything is properly set up. All the books that are returned have to go into the drop box because they're then quarantined for 72 hours. And if you go into any of the branches, you'll see a container full of books marked day 1, day 2, day 3. And at the end of that time, then they are reshelved. Going forward, you know, we're all hoping, as everyone is, that we get back to normal. And we can admit people. Currently, we can only allow limited numbers of people in each branch. And those are based on public health guidelines. So going forward, we're hoping that we can open fully. Some of the things that we had been doing during the shutdown, like curbside pickup, were quite popular, and we're going to continue doing that. We think that will be very helpful in the winter, particularly for people who perhaps don't want to be out and about on the snow and things like that. There also are some things that we've been trying to do in the library, which is offering more access to job search, some learning kits, and from some homeschooling resources. The schools cannot come to the library because that's considered a field trip, and those are canceled at the moment. So the library has been providing materials to send to the schools to help in some of their literary programs. And that's all I've got to say, unless you've got some questions.
Thank you very much, Brenda. Deputy Mayor Lolley?
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to Brenda. Can you sort of give me a better understanding of how you work from home?
Oh, well, because so much of the library activities during that period were digital, in terms of providing contact to digital services, to movies, to ebooks. Those activities were what they were doing. We're keeping all that flow of activity and information going.
So through you, again, Your Worship, just to clarify, do the library members not just have a place where they can go and do that and ask for those?
If in an ideal world, that's kind of the way things would work. But of course, all of this has to be supported with some sort of, technological support. It does not work smoothly all by itself. Just as no technical things work all by themselves.
So again, just for clarification, so the library board has IT professionals within its ranks?
We have 2 people on staff who are, who are IT trained. And everyone on staff has a certain level of IT expertise in the particular activities that we do.
Okay, and just one further question and I'm done. We're showing just under $30,000 savings in the board of $471,000 budget. You indicated that there are 3 part-time people who were let go. That to me doesn't seem like a huge saving, considering the overall, what's going on around us and what's going on here. Is there a reason why it's so low?
There are a whole variety of COVID options. One option is we could have shut the library down totally and not provided any service. But this was an extremely difficult time for all of us, and people needed the contacts. Not everybody has full access to Netflix, streaming services, all this sort of stuff, and needed to access the services that the library provided to them for various communications, for entertainment, for information. So the thought of closing the library totally did not make a whole lot of sense. The library was not physically closed for more than, I think, about 2 or 3 weeks during the time that we were provincially mandated to do that. Other than that, there were people one at a time in the branches who were providing support services. And as I said, we're providing these things like curbside service. So someone could call in and say they were looking for this, that, or the other in terms of books or DVDs or other materials. They would be packed up into a bag and would be put outside the library for pickup during specific hours. So there was not really a time when we were totally closed down. Our purpose was not to save money. It was to be efficient and to provide the best service we could, given the restrictions that we had.
I have a question from Councillor Olkey, so I'll recognize you, sir.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you, thank you, Brenda, for this. The first I'm going to start with a statement, then I'll ask a question. The library is one of the few services that the township can actually provide directly to our citizens. And the fact that this service continued throughout COVID had a certain social impact to it in the sense of social value. There's such a thing known as a social value index. And I don't have the stats at my fingertips, but the more remote the community, the more value it had. For instance, in Lyndhurst, our ongoing stats indicate there's more value for the library in Lyndhurst, despite smaller numbers. There's more value for the community there from the library than anywhere else. Perhaps you could indicate the volume of use and the type of use of the library to the council. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Olkey. I did not print out all that information. I have it somewhere, but I can't give it to you right at this minute. but there was certainly use at all the branches. And this use, you know, was available. One of the big things that the library does provide is it provides internet access. And we know that the township has very spotty internet. And there are a lot of people who access their internet through the library. They would either come into the branch, but when the branch was not open, that internet was still available. So there'd be people sitting in front of the library or sitting in front of the library accessing the internet, which, you know, we all know was even more valuable through, and it is more valuable through this shutdown. I don't have those numbers immediately in front of me. I'm sorry, I should have thought to pull those out. I think Councillor Olkey's looking for them at the moment.
In my magic file folder here. So.
Yeah.
Sure. Are there any more questions for Brenda? While we're, Councillor May?
Thank you, Worship, through you. Thank you very much, Brenda, for the update. I too, as Deputy Mayor, is kind of wondering, didn't seem that the savings were as large as possibly they could have been. So I was just wondering maybe why that was, but again, as you've explained, you know, you had some part-time people, but I'm just wondering how many, you know, like for a difference of only $17,000 in wages over a course of 6 months, basically, is what we had.
Well, it was actually about 4 months. Wasn't 6 months, because the people were still there until middle of April and came back in August. So which was just 4 months. And as I say, the purpose was to be as efficient as possible, looking at what services could realistically be provided, given the fact that patrons were not allowed into the physical buildings. We looked at what could be provided, try to optimize the services that could be provided remotely, and looked at the staff that was needed to provide those and kept those people on staff during that period of time. And, you know, as Councillor Olkey said, the library is a very important service to many of the people in the township. And you know, I think even more so during the time when other things were not available to them.
Any further questions? Councillor Cody.
Thank you, Worship, through you to Ms. Lolley. I'm going to thank you for what you did in all the library outlets through the darker days of COVID. I know from this end of the township, a number of parents, particularly with young children, were happy that they had somewhere that they could relate to and go. And we got to remember the schools were shut down. Everybody was told to stay home. That's easier said than done with young children. I'll just leave it at that. Just for clarity before I let you go, with regards to your cleaning before and after, so the library hours to the public are basically the same as before, when they start half hour later and finish half hours sooner. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. And that's the situation in all branches.
Okay, thank you.
The number of in-person visits in the branches are limited by the amount of space we have. So in Sealy's Bay, because of our size, we can have 5 people in the branch at one time. So if there's 1 staff, it means 4 patrons can be in at one time.
Okay, any further questions? Seeing none, I'll put a motion on the floor, moved by Councillor Burrell, seconded by Deputy Mayor Lackey, that we can move forward with the council thank Ms. Lolley for the library activity presentation. Any further discussion on this? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor, please signify. All those opposed, and it carries. Okay. Thank you very much, Ms. Lolley.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll move on to number 5 on the agenda, staff reports. First report is FN-025-20. Motion is put on the floor by Deputy Mayor Lackey, seconded by Councilor Well. The committee will recommend that council receive finance report FN-025-20 dated October 5th, 2020 to approve the revised reserve and reserve fund. Any discussion on this motion? And we have Director Tyndall on the line, so she'll be able to answer whatever, but I asked you to make sure that you're clearly speaking into your microphone so she can hear us. So I'll recognize Councilor Rowell and Councilor Maybe, and then I believe Councilor Foley.
Thank you, and through you, your worship. Thank Treasury for putting together a improved reserves policy. I do have a wealth of questions. First off, it seems to me we have now 6 discretionary funds. We have 6 non-discretionary, we have 12 discretionary funds in all, 6 of which are capital. We have obligatory funds. And the new one, which we reinstituted, is this tax stabilization. And as I read through it, my simplest question is, the tax stabilization, the working fund, and the contingency fund do indeed seem to be of the same ilk. So my question is, we have all of these funds, and it makes it rather challenging at budget on where this money is flying around, it comes from, going into. Is there a reason, and I'm sure there is beyond my comprehension, of why we require a stabilization fund, which was gotten rid of in 2015-16? Why we would reinstitute that? Is it a bookkeeping thing? Is it add to transparency? In my mind, it doesn't add any transparency. It just means we put money in these funds and then they come back out again. I don't find that necessarily transparent. Do we need the 3 funds? Can we amalgamate that into one? Further, the CIP fund, I see it alternating between discretionary and obligatory. I'm not sure which it is. I also know that at this time, I don't believe we have a CIP policy. They can carry this fund. I don't even know if it has any money. So that's a question I would like to ask. Is there, when it comes to the audit, and I've gone through these audit materials and it's challenging going back and forth between budget and audit. And at the end of the day, is what we're proposing good for the audit, neutral on an audit, or whatever? Because I still find that at the end of the day, our reserve policy, because of its historical development, is still confusing in a sense. It doesn't have to be. It seems it could be stripped down a little bit. That's my question. Thank you very much. I had lots more.
Ms. Tyndall, were you able to catch those questions?
I think I got most of them. So through your worship, I'll try to answer them in order. So the tax stabilization fund was created, I think, and approved by the previous acting treasurer, director of finance. So all I did by adding that was just including it based on his report that was approved by council. I can't remember the date exactly, but it was right before I came on board, I think. So you're right, those 3 funds, the tax stabilization, working fund, contingency, they're all similar in nature. Working fund is typically thought of as a means by which you accumulate cash in your bank account as well. So it gives you a cushion that you've got at least the amount of money in your working fund is in your bank account. Should we get to a point a year where we haven't collected tax payments in a while and we have a lot of bills coming out of our account, that's supposed to help buffer that. The contingency obviously is just for contingencies, and the tax stabilization is, I think, intended to really help with things like appeals, assessment appeals, where we may see a significant reduction in revenue if an appeal is successful. In terms of transparency, I mean, the biggest thing for transparency to do with the reserve funds is the fact that everything we put in or out of the reserve fund should be approved by council either through budget or through a council report. So this policy outlines basically the intent, and I think the thing that is in this policy that wasn't in the previous one is the responsibility section. Again, trying to clarify who's responsible for what. But every transfer to and from a reserve fund should be coming through council approval, either through budget or separate council reports. The Community Improvement Plan Reserve Fund, I might actually ask if the Director of Planning is there. She might be able to help. I believe that is an area she's looking to put a policy in place or a new policy. And I think that there is, so there is a reason why we have that fund there is but she may be able to speak to that one a little bit better. And in terms of audit, any policy that we're providing and getting council approval on, it's just in terms of good business practice. And obviously that's the authority we have then to use the funds in the way they're intended. And then again, they come back through the budget process. So it's not directly related to audit, but the better documentation, the better policy we have, the easier it is for staff to manage the reserve funds.
So I'm going to ask the Director of Planning to step forward to the microphone to discuss the CIP, and then we'll get your follow-up. And the Treasurer can follow up.
Thank you through your worship. So the CIP Reserve Fund is a fund that has existed for some time. We've just been looking into it and redefining it. So what we can do is use that fund to actually create the community improvement plan. And also it's a great benefit in terms of helping support the community improvement plan because it will assist us in the incentives that could be used through the plan once we have one in place to incent some of the community improvement throughout the township.
So just for clarification, community improvement means things like storefront grants or that sort of thing. Is that not just for
it can mean a number of things. So the first step in entering into the community improvement process is meeting with the local community areas to define what it is we need through the township. So the community improvement plan could include affordable housing incentives. It can include improvement with facades and Main Street improvement. There's a number of different ways to provide incentives under a community improvement plan, but having that fund there is something that will help us work through that process and provide an incentive.
Yeah.
Thank you for that, Director. Is the CIP an obligatory fund or is it a discretionary fund? Is it in the plan? It is an act, but is it as a reserve fund?
Through your worship, it's the Planning Act doesn't speak to reserve funds. The Planning Act provides the authority for community improvement plans. So the reserve fund, and I would defer to the Director of Finance on that, but my thought is it's a discretionary fund.
Thank you.
Director Tyndall, do you want to clarify whether that's discretionary or obligatory, as Mr. Groans?
Through your worship. So yeah, it's discretionary. It's actually in the section other discretionary reserve funds, page 12 of 119 in the package. So I'm not sure if there was confusion, but there is the cash in lieu of parkland reserve fund, which is obligatory. It is legislated, but the community improvement plan is not legislated.
So we have follow-up from Councilor Grohl on that.
Thank you very much, Kate. I appreciate the effort every which way here. I do have a question. The way we have written the parkland and the cash in lieu of parkland, under responsibilities, you have that council is basically responsible for how these funds are done, but the wording of the particular, let me bring it up here, of the parkland fund, it says, it is a bit nitpicky, but I am always concerned about this parkland fund. Our township is by and large very rural in nature. We're not a big city. It's not like I don't believe we need to be buying large tracts of land to make parks. So therefore, we have this money sitting there, And no one has ever been able to explain to me what we plan to do with this money. It's almost like it's dead money sitting in a fund. And it says here, senior management members will determine which capital projects meet the objectives. Well, I think it's contradictory to the responsibilities that are later on highlighted. That's just my opinion. And I wonder if someone could give me, once again, more clarity as to what we actually intend to do with the parkland money, not what the statute says. I didn't read that. But what we're a rural township in terms of buying more parkland. I can go for a walk on the parkway. I can go for a walk on any number of provincial and federal lands here. What exactly are we saving this money for? What are we really anticipating with that money? Thank you.
I think that's a director of planning ask. Is that correct, director of finance?
Well, I can take a shot at it, and then I think Marnie can probably add to it, but it's not money that the township is putting in the reserve fund. So we're not setting this money aside on the township. This is money that gets contributed through development. So if a developer were to come in and put in a subdivision and not include a park, there's certain requirements in this legislation. And the reason that the director of planning is included in looking at this reserve fund is because she is more familiar with that legislation than I am. So, but this money isn't money that I'm deciding we're setting aside. This money is money that's contributed either in cash in lieu of parkland, or they actually have to contribute parkland based on the size of the development. And then we would look at what work we're doing to expand parks or add new parks, and that's what we can use this money for. But again, the director of planning can probably add to that.
Go ahead, director of planning.
Thank you, through your worship. So the cash in the parkland fund, as the director of finance mentioned, when a development comes forward that's for high density housing or creating new lots, we have a parkland dedication bylaw. The township has a parkland dedication bylaw that requires a certain conveyance of either cash in lieu or land. So it's not necessarily conveying or acquiring large tracts of land. However, there are official plan policies that speak to if it's a waterfront property and parkland dedication required, we should be looking at where we can acquire waterfront property. A good example of that is potential property for future waterfront uses like a boat ramp or something along those lines, or looking at trails and pathways along the waterfront. So it gives us the opportunity to either land or take cash in lieu. If we take cash in lieu of parkland, that money can be used for capital improvements in parks and areas where there are new residential uses that are intensifying the area. So we can use it to improve the capital infrastructure in those areas as parkland. So it can be used to improve existing parkland in areas, it can be used to acquire land. So anytime there's a plan of subdivision, we would bring that forward to council for comments on the draft plan approval. So we would seek direction whether it should be land or whether it should be cash in the parkland.
Okay, go ahead, follow up, Councilor Rowell, and then I'll go on to other councilors.
In theory, everything is great and everything is highly understandable. In theory, I get back to the idea we're a very rural setting here. It's pretty easy to find recreational possibilities. And in our years here, has any money ever been spent from that to improve a park? Has any money ever been spent to acquire land? It's all great in theory, but my problem is every time I brought up that we tap into that for something to improve an existing park, which is a condition, it seems like I'm talking to a ghost. No one wants to spend any money on this thing. And yeah, if we were a big city, I can see us wanting to acquire some parkland. That would be a high. We're a rural situation. I don't quite understand. Is it so far in the future that we're looking to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on a piece of property, or is this money just sitting there? It strikes me as it's just sitting there. I don't understand. In theory, I do. Operationally, I have problems with it. So thank you.
I have Councilor Maybe and then Deputy Mayor. Or do you have a question for Marnie?
Sorry, I thought Kim there.
Oh, sorry, just hold off on council, maybe, I apologize. Director Goodman, would you like to say something?
Sorry, and through you, your worship, to Councillor Grell, I did want to address the expenditures that may be related to the Parkland Fund, and I do believe the improvements at Batcho Channel over the last couple of years were credited to that account. So trails development, privacy screen for a porta potty, the permitting that was required for that. We poured a concrete pad for a future pavilion installation and whatnot. So those are the sorts of projects in terms of developing our parks that would be considered under that particular fund.
And just to elaborate before I go to Councillor Corral to follow up again, the Battle Channel, when they developed that area, they had to donate a certain amount of land, correct?
Thank you, your worship. Admittedly, that was a little bit before my time, but I do understand that that property chunk was donated when that property was developed. It wasn't a cash in lieu situation, whereas that would happen in other instances.
So, Councillor Corral, we're gonna get this straightened out.
You know what, and again, I just feel, so we have this other fund, it's called Parks and Recreation Fund, which is in, of course, the capital section. So we build a $250,000 pavilion in Lansdowne, which one could have easily argued that money could have come from the cash in lieu Parkland Fund, because it is developing some recreational sense or whatever, but money didn't come out of there, to the best of my knowledge, and yet it put a significant strain on the parks reserve. It's also my belief that this council dealt with that in its early days. So once again, I see this, not a conflict, I just see this, I don't get the clarity between parks and rec funds and building gazebos, and what you just described to me, and I'm familiar with it, down on the other side, yeah, wonderful development. But once again, where does this parkland money, they're almost overlapping in some regards, and I think so I just want to make us some clarity, and I want us to be aware as we move into budgeting that this money exists. And I don't like the phraseology and the policy that seems to lock it away as a private, don't touch that money. And I get the sense, don't touch the money. It's going to be senior management team that determines what we do for. I'm not happy with that. And
I believe Marty has something to add, and then I'll move on to council maybe.
Thank you. If I could just provide a little bit of clarification around the cash in lieu of Parkland, it's intended to be growth-related spending. So if there's development that's occurring and the cash in lieu is paid, then it goes towards improving facilities in that area that need improvement as a result of intensification or growth. So I think the difference between the two is that the cash in lieu of Parkland is specifically related to growth and increased need for parkland or facilities or improved facilities related to growth.
I'm going to move on to Councillor Maybe. And then Deputy Mayor. Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship, through you. I have several questions, of course, just to be clear. The 0.05%, which is what is normally done, it looks like that's being taken away. It's going to be a floating percentage, number one question. How is that actually going to work? Reserve funds. Okay, the Heritage Conservation and Celebration Grant Reserve Fund, which has $123,700 to Recreation and Culture Reserve Fund. I guess, why is that happening? With the same change, recreation will benefit from that money. That's a question. Why was the Heritage Reserve Fund? What is the history of the Reserve Heritage Fund? Again, it's another one of the lists in here. Has there never been a recreation fund before? And with this boost of $123,700, is this a start of the fund for Jesse Street? Another question, the tax gas tax projects. I'm not really sure what the projects have been, but I'm wondering what they are. The CIP, that was kind of given to us because that was a question in this document. It doesn't give a very good representation of maybe what it is. So I'm wondering if that needs to be expanded a little bit before we actually do something with it, because it's, I don't see that it's clear that it's X or Y. Rebuilding of the Heritage and Culture Fund, not using it all. So with park, again, Splash Pad or Jerry Park, Hendricks Park, any of the improvements there, some of the money should be there because that is definitely a development area. Special Projects Reserve Fund, not quite sure what terms special, what would that be? Tax Stabilization Reserve Fund, will it be used for next fiscal? Since we've had this COVID-19, and whether any of that will have to be utilized in our upcoming budget to help us out get through next year. And that's all my questions. Thank you.
Director Tyndall, I know that there was a lot of questions, so if you missed some of them, I'm sure that Brian will let you know if you missed anything. So hopefully you heard the questions.
Thank you, through you, Your Worship. So just maybe I could just summarize some of the changes in the report. The obligatory reserve funds, such as cash in lieu of parkland and federal gas tax fund land, or federal gas tax reserve fund, are legislated or required under provincial or federal restrictions as to what we can or cannot spend. So like the federal gas tax reserve fund is restricted. We have to apply. We fill out applications as to what projects we are going to fund. They are mainly road projects, core infrastructure projects. I mean, I can Google it and find and provide that to council if you wish, but those are obligatory ones. We have no say. We can't just take the money and do what we want with it. It's restricted. That's why they're obligatory. The percentage taken away, I think didn't hear the whole question on that one, but I think you were referring to the tax stabilization or.
Thank you. The tax was originally 0.5% of, where is here, remove one half of 1% to be added to tax rate stipulation from the tax rate stabilization reserve fund to allow the Director of Finance to propose an appropriate transfer amount in the budget on an annual basis. So I was wondering, if you're taking 5%, 2% some year, would it ever get back to 0.5%? Is that a floating percentage?
Through your worship. So I took the percentage amount out because I feel like we should probably maintain or increase that amount, but it's based on what's happening in the current environment. If we have COVID, if we know that there are significant tax impacts that could be coming down the road, we may want to increase that. Council may want to direct through budget process to say they want a much larger percentage. And so to have a percentage actually in the policy ties our hands somewhat, because then I have to come back every time I want to change that and actually change the policy. So that's why I took that percentage out. The Heritage and the Heritage Reserve Fund. So I have all the same questions you do. I don't know what the history is of that reserve fund. I could not find what the intent was. I could not find a clear policy around why we had that reserve fund, which is why I'm proposing we take the money out of that reserve fund and collapse it, because it's just complicating things in the sense that I don't understand what the purpose of it was either. The money that we're putting into the Heritage and Conservation Reserve Fund, that new reserve fund is based on a specific policy that we're following, and we didn't actually have a reserve fund set up for, so we should have that set up. If we don't spend the money in the year in accordance with that policy, it is to go to that reserve fund. So now we will be able to track that appropriately. The money that was in that reserve fund was spent on projects that in the past that were not necessarily heritage projects. So I'm not sure how that happened, and I'm not sure again what the intent was though. So again, just trying to clean that up, and we move the money to the Recreation Reserve Fund. Through discussion with senior management, that reserve fund is not new. We've had a Recreation Reserve Fund. We discussed the fact that it seems most likely that future projects that might be somewhat heritage in nature and culture and so on would probably make sense to come from the Recreation Reserve Fund. But again, all of these are discretionary reserve funds, so it's really at council's direction that we can pull from them. And there was never any discussion, anything in regards to Jesse Street. It's just been moved there because that seemed to make the most sense to the senior management team when we discussed it. The Special Projects Reserve Fund is really intended to cover master plans, studies, anything that's not capital. Well, it's not going to be able to be funded through capital the same way. It's not an asset that we're obtaining at the end of the study. It's a study we're doing for future planning. We're trying to avoid, if we have a $50,000 study, that we include that in an operating budget in a given year, and then we don't have it again for a few years, but we may have to do it every 3 to 5 years. That's a significant increase for an operating budget to kind of manage that. So instead, what we want to do is put aside an even amount of money every single year to try to cover all these types of studies and provide funding. So I think there was a number of studies we had proposed in 2020 budget. Now we've deferred, I think, at least half of them because of COVID. But we did do, for example, a roads needs study, a portion of the servicing study. I think like there's a few that we did use that, and it's to just try to even out so we don't have big tax increases because we happen to have to do a study that year. I think the last question was about reserve funds and COVID. So as we get closer to year end and we see what kind of financial state we are in this year end, that was when I would bring forward a council report asking for authority if I was going to propose to bring money out of a reserve fund to help balance this year's budget. So that would be at council's approval based on a report once we see where we actually end up at the end of the year.
Okay. Thank you very much, Director of Finance.
Okay, Deputy Mayor, you had your hand up.
Your worship, and through you to the treasurer. For the last 19 years, last few days, we relied on casino revenue to supply our reserve funds. You know, have we looked at some of these like community grants? You know, our capital infrastructure, we started taking advantage of that money and turning over our fleets in 7 years, you know, rather than 10 or 12, is, you know, fire trucks, plow trucks. Is that something that has been taken into consideration, since clearly those funds will not be coming our way as they used to?
Go ahead.
Through your worship. So definitely taking that into consideration, and in some of the policy changes, we removed percentage allocations from the casino money because if we don't have that money, we still need to be putting money into those reserve funds, obviously, as you're pointing out. So I don't want to be tied to a percentage. What we should be doing and hope to do in the future is looking at our asset management plan, our reserve fund models going out the next 5-10 years and trying to determine how much we need to transfer the reserve funds to cover the capital budgets that we're going to need to be funding, and then whether we need to start looking at debt or other. Obviously, we're always going to be looking for grant opportunities or any other revenue streams we can. But really, the reserve fund policy is a more integrated, should be one tool out of many that we're using as we're financial planning and looking hopefully more proactively into the future to try to make sure we're sustainable. And so the casino revenue decrease is definitely going to be a challenge as we talk about budget for 2021.
Thank you, Councilor James.
Just a general comment, if I may, Your Worship. What I took away from this in the context of trying to understand how the asset management process is holding, is a lot of these things, to my eye, reflected an effort to tighten things up. And in the course of tightening things up, sometimes it takes a while for things to settle down. But at the end of the day, correct me if I'm wrong, we ultimately, the council ultimately decides what gets spent from where and how. So as we refine this process,
it's up to staff to make a solid recommendation and a lot of confidence in this particular team to do that. But at the end of the day, we're going to decide whether it's 7 years for the trucks or 10 years. It's going to be based on the reality of our fiscal situation and not necessarily a fancy name on a reserve fund. I think we need to have confidence in the staff that they're not going to just look at the fancy names of the reserve fund, but bring us recommendations that we can move forward with. That's all. Thanks.
Any further comments or questions? Councilor Cody?
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you, to Keith. I gather that the asset management plan helped guide what you're doing here with rearranging the funds, rewording of such. Because as we all know, this is new to us, not so much in the last few months to yourself. This is a new form of thinking we as council and the township have to acquire. And is that what has happened here? This is kind of, you use the template of the asset management plan to guide us in the right direction on some of these funds.
Director Tyndall, did you hear that?
Through your worship, kind of. Was the question, sorry, was the question kind of trying to relate the reserve funds and how we use them to the asset management plan?
Yes, essentially, is this that we're seeing in this policy that you presented to us directly related to how we will go forward with the asset management and how that will feed back to our reserve fund policy?
So I think the change in the policy is mainly to try to clean it up. And like, for example, that heritage reserve fund where I couldn't figure out what the intent was, obviously then that makes it challenging. So, but really when we look at asset management, the reserve fund policy is one component that will help feed into asset management planning. And when we're doing financial planning, looking forward, trying to make sure we understand, and as pointed out earlier, that everything that we're talking about, whether it's reserve funds or debt or whatever we need to do to be able to fund our capital requirements, and looking at those requirements to make sure they make sense over the next 5 to 10 years, comes to council through budget or other council reports for approval. We would never be taking money out of reserve funds or putting money in reserve funds unless it was approved through a council report. And so that's really important in terms of transparency, as I think was mentioned earlier, that we want to make sure we are transparent through the process we're using to fund the capital. When we're looking at asset management, that document will become obviously public knowledge to the asset management plan when it's updated. And then through the budget process, we can be looking every year at what our next maybe 5 to 10 years looks like. Those numbers won't be accurate, they'll be work in progress, but we start to get a better picture, at least, of looking at our future and not just paying attention to the current year, not trying to just get through 1 year. We actually start to plan out for the next 3 to 5, 5 to 10. It will evolve and get better as we go.
Thank you. I'm going to recognize Councillor Olkey and then back to Councillor Royal and then try to wrap this up.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you. I couldn't quite hear everything everyone was saying, so I hope I'm not asking something or stating something that's redundant. In looking at this document, it seemed to me there was a lot of redundancy in it. Many people were, in numerous places, 3 places at least, we talk about roads, bridges, and water, wastewater. Now, I gather that the Ontario Community Infrastructure Reserve Fund is set up by the province, and it's provincial money in there. The next one, the Water Wastewater Fund, it seems to me that's when the province is telling us to save our own money and put it in there. And then we have the Capital Infrastructure Reserve Fund. Is there any effort to streamline this that we can do on our part? Or do you anticipate the provincial government, under current economic restrictions for everybody, might try to streamline some of this stuff? It seems to me that there's really one pot of money here, wherever it comes from. And if we're mandated to do something and call it by something, okay, I get that. But it seems to me we might be trying to confuse ourselves, or over the years we have confused ourselves with some of these things. And I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Director Tyndall, were you able to hear Councillor Olkey?
Yes, thanks through you, Your Worship. So the Ontario Community Infrastructure Fund, similar to the federal gas tax, there's certain restrictions around the type of projects we can use, and we have to report back. Part of the way that we prepare our year-end financial statements and our financial information reporting for the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing requires us to track those monies through a reserve fund. It is actually maybe make it a little more complicated, but at the end of the day, at the end of the year, when I'm putting together the financial statements, having separate reserve funds for some of these is required through reporting. And so that's partly why, but the OCIF federal gas tax are funded through other levels of government, and we do have to follow certain guidelines and restrictions on those ones. The water wastewater reserve fund is solely to do with those utilities. So we get money from those rates that we charge those customers. Any surplus goes into that reserve fund. That reserve fund only funds water and sewer infrastructure. It does nothing for any other municipally funded infrastructure. So that is a completely separate reserve fund. And then we also have the Capital Infrastructure Fund, which funds basically the road network and anything kind of attached to it. So the sidewalks, signage, whatever's to do with that road. So that one is discretionary in nature. That's where we decide how much money we're going to put into it. We try to put in enough to cover the projects we need to do in the coming years. And we will likely see that one we may need to actually borrow because as everyone is aware, the road work is extremely expensive, and that one will be hard to maintain to actually cover all those costs.
Okay, thank you. The CIO would like to weigh in on this, and then I'll go to Council.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you. Your comments, Council, are very welcomed, and we hear you. What we're trying to do is put in place something that we can start working with and recognizing that it's a living document and that as we need to fine tune, we'll come back and make course corrections with you. Oversight still rests with Council, and as Director Tyndall had pointed out, we still need Council approval when we're moving money in and out. Councillor Jameson's comments are very poignant. We need something that we need to work with. I see this draft policy right now as an improvement with what we have, and it will add some clarity. We cannot go and itemize every little thing that's going to happen under a particular fund. As soon as you do that, if you omit something, your hands are tied. So we're trying to find a balance between transparent without getting into the weeds so much that we are hamstrung. So that's from the spirit that where we were drafting this and the fine work that Director Tyndall has done on covering up this new policy. So that's the background on it. Council will be very involved through the budget process and also as we start using the policy and making transfers in and out. So do not feel that you're going to let us kind of go off with this open-ended policy somehow and run amok. There's still reporting, there's still oversight, and we will see to it that
Thanks very much, CEO. Our Councillor Brown. So he moved up to directors next. Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. The last two comments from Councillor Opie and from our CAOC have been well received by myself, because I was just going to say, in a perfect world, is this we are going to be asked to vote on this next week. We're going to be asked to approve this document. So before we do that, I would just like to ask some reflection this week on behalf of Treasury and perhaps senior management. Is this what we would like to start with? We can do anything we want outside of the obligatory. So perhaps this week, just sit down and say, yes, this does make sense. I appreciate the living document. But when it comes to budget time, I know how rather intricate this can become. So in a perfect world, we need 12 discretionary funds. Would we like to bundle some of that up? It could still be transparent, I appreciate that. Would it make life easier in the long run? And I do appreciate everything the treasury has done to provide this document.
Thank you very much. Any further questions or concerns in regards to this policy that's been put forward in this report? Seeing none, I will call the question on the motion that's on the floor. All those in favor of N-025-20, the revised reserve and reserve fund policy, please signify if you're in favor. Signify if you're opposed. And we will say that that's carried. Thank you very much. Okay. And the next motion that's on the floor, we'll do this one and then we'll take a quick break. Motion is moved by Deputy Mayor Lolley, seconded by Councilor Brown. The committee of the whole recommends that council authorize the mayor and clerk to enter into an agreement with KPMG LLP to provide external audit services for a term of up to 5 years, commencing with the 2020 year-end audit. Discussion on this motion. Go ahead, Councilor Maybe.
Thank you, working through you, possibly to our director of finance. This bid is a 5-year term, I take it. And how did the adjustment or evaluation or adjusted bid actually come to be? Because I come from a bid and you got a price and you go with it. So I'm kind of wondering how it's another 200,000, 11 more, and that works out to over 5 years, just shy of 300,000 a year. So just wondering if I get some clarification.
Director.
Through your worship, if I heard you correctly, if you're looking at the numbers in the document where there's 1.2 million and then there's a technical score and an adjusted bid, those numbers are for example only. So the paragraph before is just trying to explain how the calculation works, and that's an example of the calculation in the table. Those aren't actual numbers from this particular procurement process.
It's to make an example of the calculation that she used in order to take the bids without disclosing what the actual bid was, I believe.
That's correct.
Correct. So the one thing that I would like to make known is that our previous auditor we had here for, I believe, 20 years, 18, something to that effect. We hadn't actually gone out and asked anybody to bid on this for quite some time. So the fact that we've gone out and actually put it back to the RFP process is very important to make sure that we're getting. So Director Chinwell, would you like to speak to the, I believe you and I were speaking about this in the context that they were going to something to do with the FIR reporting. We were talking about this today and I forget now. Mine is gone blank.
Through your worship, so the RFP we put out includes some work to do with year-end statement preparation and financial information reporting. So in the past, the township has actually had the auditor do a lot of the year-end work to prepare the financial statements. I think, in fact, they did pretty much all of the financial statement preparation. I'm not sure if anybody's familiar with the FIR, but it's a significantly large spreadsheet that we have to complete every year. Pretty much every aspect of our year-end financials that gets submitted into the ministry, and those tasks were being performed previously by our external auditors. The RFP we put out, we hope to bring those tasks in-house as we work through the next couple year ends, to put in processes and reporting so we can actually prepare the financial statements in-house. For the 2019 year end, I did prepare some of the draft statements and I did do all of the capital reporting for year end, which previously was done externally. So those are included as costs going forward, with basically the intent that we actually bring those things in-house, but the auditors still play a role obviously in all those tasks as well. So the bids were evaluated on a number of criteria, which are outlined in my report, like their experience, their technical response, and then the quality of the proposal. Once we take that score, that initial score, we use their dollar value, what they've quoted as a price, as in that calculation, and it comes up with an adjusted bid to basically look at what the price reflects onto their score to give us the end result, which was KPMG coming out first.
Sorry, I'm still having some difficulty because again, I also heard just now that this isn't the real cost. So why are we, or how can we actually say yes to something we don't have a real cost for?
So through your worship, so we have the costs that we received, the quotes from each proponent that bid on the RFP, and we've taken those costs into consideration when we evaluated the total points. They were adjusted for the cost. So if they came in higher, it would adjust their bid differently than if they came in lower. And that was through that calculation in the report is an example of how that works.
So is this the cost? There's, again, I come back to the same thing. How can I say yes to a cost? I don't know.
So would it be fair to say, Director Kendall, that the reason we don't publicize the actual cost right now, it will come back to us during budget point in time to clarify the actual, but if we were to publicize all the bids, then it's not a secret bid process.
But we're saying this is the company we want, so this is their bid.
If through your worship, if this was a tender document and it was based solely on cost, then the costs would be published. This was not based solely on cost. We evaluated them on a number of factors in addition to the cost. So typically in other reports that have been presented to council with an RFP, we don't list all the prices that were proposed because that's not what we're evaluating it on solely. It's not whoever the lowest cost is, it's whoever the best proposal with the combined with the cost.
So I'm going to recognize Deputy Mayor. He's put his hand up, and then Councillor Cody.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you, I would agree entirely with Councillor Meany. If this is something that perhaps should be discussed in camera or exposed in camera, then we should do that next week. But yeah, I'm not willing to just say, okay, because you say so, this is what we're doing. We're spending taxpayers' money.
So perhaps we could discuss a range. I don't know, or we can't do that in open council. Okay, so based on the fact that we're having a couple of councillors having difficulty with the amount because we're not discussing the actual amount yet, I think we should maybe perhaps defer. Madam Clerk, is that the correct? We would defer this and have further discussion in camera to discuss that, and then come forward and report out. Would that be the proper protocol, Madam Clerk? So the motion would be to defer then.
Mover and seconder.
Mover and seconder. So I'll have Councillor Meady. Okay, and then Deputy Mayor. Discussion on the deferral.
Yes.
Go ahead.
I understand the points being raised. But two things. One, on this deferral, does this take us to a point where we cannot make a decision? The timing on appointing an auditor sometimes has a window, depending on your organization. So that's my first one.
Director Tyndall, do we have a time frame by which we have to award this?
Through your worship, so the sooner it's awarded, the better, because we need to be planning for interim audit, and we will be doing that immediately after this is approved and the agreement is entered into.
Okay, so the interim audit, we can't start that process. Usually they come in and make sure that we're on track to do what we need to do for the audit. But we won't be able to do that until it's approved. But if we move it to the deferral until next week, which is the 13th, I believe, then we can make that decision on the 13th.
So procedurally, we can still approve this next week, notwithstanding the fact that we're deferring.
Correct. Correct.
Okay, and one other comment, if I might. I support the deferral based on understanding this, but it's very unusual to have the same auditor for 22 years. Usually it's 5 to 7 years for most organizations, and clearly we're going to be looking for the tests that are much more rigorous than we've had in the past, because we've inherited a few things that we found out about afterwards that were not subject to any kind of testing through the audit process. So that's a comment about, and a small one in my mind is the library somehow managing to be allocated some money and then holding in reserve for years after years and was never caught in the test. So I support the need to change auditors, because it's not a reflection on the past auditors, it's just that everybody gets a little too comfortable, which is why you change your auditors on a regular basis.
Versus report number CDS-023-20- sorry, -20. I thought there was more there. Moved by Councillor Jameson and seconded by Councillor Cody. The committee will recommend that council approve community grant disbursements in the amount of $22,560.55 as detailed in Appendix A in the Community and Business Services Report number CDS-023-20. Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to Council, I would like to beg your forgiveness. Council may have noticed that I attached the wrong appendices to my report as I was trying to learn the new Civic Web. I think I got a little ahead of myself. I have put down in front of you a paper copy of the actual proposed disbursements. That total, as indicated in the recommendation, $22,560.55.
Opposed to the 29,000 that was on the original.
On the original appendix, yes.
So just to reiterate to council before we go any further on this particular motion, the last time we got into the weeds, so to speak, in that we questioned some of the amounts and we changed some of the amounts. And I don't want to say that that was arbitrary, but I just want to reiterate to council that there is a process by which a scoring process, I should say, that all the applications go through. So the amounts that are here are based on that very stringent process. So what I don't want us to do is to arbitrarily decide that we like one charity more than another, because unless there's really something that wasn't in the application that was not included or not described, and there's something that's changed in the last however many weeks since the application has come forward, really no material change. So the numbers and the recommendations that are made are based on that process. So I just want to reiterate that. Are there any questions or concerns in regards to the recommended funding amounts for the organizations that apply? Councillor Jameson and then Councillor Meady.
I have no concerns about this at this stage, other than to say I support what you just said about getting it, because we did the last time and we didn't have the matrix in front of us. My own view is if we have some concerns about outcomes, then we really need to look at the matrix. We really need to ask for a review about how things are done rather than get into looking at each one of these things individually. So I'm supporting what you're saying. I was going to bring in the line for the appreciate you making those comments. Thank you.
Go ahead, Councillor Meady.
Thank you for reading through you, and thank you for updating the report, the proper amounts. I did have that as a note. So yeah, I thank you for that. And on the one on our computer that posted what you presented, it's the Humane Society is looking for a resource in the parking lot. I think the gas line right beside them might be able to do their parking lot as a goodwill of that community spirit, you know. The other one was the Rock Tournament is actually going ahead, or whether it is or not. I don't know,
Through you, Your Worship, staff opted to take an approach very similar to the spring community grants, where we would award the money in principle, although a check would not be released until such time as we were able to confirm that the event did in fact happen. Of course, we would allow for COVID-related modifications, so if they have to change their plans somewhat to for social distancing or whatever the case may be. But until such time, typically we would award the grants and the check would go out. We've done the check presentation in the past. However, for events at this point, we're kind of
dialing back a little bit.
Councillor Foley?
Thank you, Your Worship. So question, we don't want to get into the weeds, at what point do we have this discussion?
If you have a concern about an item, we can have that discussion. It's not to say that we can't have the discussion, but just to remind us that the numbers that have come through a process.
Well, what jumped off this proposal to me, what jumped off the page, I should say, Lansdowne Association for Revitalization has requested monies, and the state's in here to include board succession planning. I think of it all the voluntary organizations we have in our township. We're opening ourselves up to paying for succession planning. And do we really, somebody explained to me succession planning on a volunteer board? I mean, you're not, quite frankly, most volunteer boards, you don't know who's going to be on there next year or 5 years from now. I mean, there will be some that will. But I look to the Lansdowne Fair Board, locally here in this area. Lansdowne Fair has been running well in excess of what is 157 years. I doubt they've ever, I understand being correct, I doubt they've ever had asked for succession planning. And where I'm coming from is I have a problem telling the taxpayers that we're going to put their money forward to a voluntary group for succession planning. And then furthermore, to bring it to highlight, it was mentioned, not in this one, but in the package presented to us, that the chamber, or I should say was it not the Legion, one of their pieces they're going to put forward was succession planning. That was in your proposal somewhere, that the very last one. I didn't bring that with me here tonight.
Sorry, do you have the incorrect one that is attached?
What was the very last one, if you don't mind? Because it stated in there succession planning as well. And I thought, well, where's the answer? If some organization is providing that succession planning seminar, so to speak, free of charge, and some other organization wants taxpayers to pay for it, well, why don't we just join that group with this group? Taxpayers are off the hook.
It's Thousand Islands Chamber of Commerce.
So do you want to perhaps give your reasoning on that, or?
Absolutely, thank you, Your Worship, and through you. I think the Lansdowne Association for Revitalization's application goes far beyond just the succession planning, but it's really, and this is not uncommon. So you are right, there will be a number of organizations that are experiencing the same thing. They're struggling with volunteer recruitment, retention, any sort of succession planning, and we've seen a number of organizations who their vote worker is in such poor shape. I'm not saying that that's the case with this group, certainly, but it makes it increasingly difficult to see groups come in and go, and because they are incorporated now as a not-for-profit, that record keeping becomes a little bit more important. But it's more about, I think, for this organization, looking at what they're planning to do over the next 5 years aligns with what we're endeavoring to do as a municipality, so that we're not duplicating efforts, but that they're taking those volunteer resources and putting them to the best use. So some examples from their last 5-year plan include the Textile Festival, the Equine Extravaganza, and some other events that have really brought a number of people to our community, some of their beautification projects, and they're looking for support to develop that plan over the next 5-year horizon.
So the only other thing I would add to what Ms. Goodman has said, they also, along with the other revitalization groups, who all have the ability to apply for this funding as well, just to be very, very clear. They all stepped up during COVID to take care of a lot of horticulture projects. So the flower beds out here, that was maintained by volunteers through LAFRA, as well as Lyndhurst, as well as Rockport, as well as, so, yeah, and Sealy's Bay, sorry, I was forgetting that last one. So, not to say that that's the reason we give them money, but those community groups are important to the local settlement areas, to keep things vibrant and there. So I'll just leave it at that. Go ahead, Mr.
Further to the point on succession planning, again, it was in error that I attached the one, and you will see actually in the body of the report now, there were 2 organizations that came forward with a request that we couldn't accommodate, owing to the fact that both organizations have received funding from us previously this year. The succession planning is referenced by the Canada 1000 Islands Chamber of Commerce in terms of business succession planning, which I have no doubt can translate over to not-for-profit succession planning as well, but it's specifically targeted in terms of small business resiliency and recovery. So how are they going to adapt and move ahead owing to COVID?
Sorry, I'll recognize Councillor Jamieson and then I'll recognize Deputy Mayor.
To Councillor Bodie's point, with respect to where the taxpayers' money goes, we did determine to put an amount of money in the budget, which we approved, to the extent that then we put a process in place and community groups will come and ask for what they think is important. So it's not about this particular group with respect to succession, but I will say, as a member of another group, the business of succession planning, not to put too fine a point on it, is that where I come from, we're all getting too old to be on these volunteer groups. We need succession planning, and we need a little help with succession planning in order to get younger people somehow to get more involved. And we may find with the, and we all know this, the tremendous amount of value that the volunteers generate in the various festivals and events and all the things that ultimately come back, that I support the idea of them having succession planning, because one, they're recognizing they need to do it in order to still be there for the community in 5 or 10 years. And 2, hopefully this group will share it with, say, Savaro, which I'm a member, and Linters too, which I know is struggling. Linters Revitalization Committee is struggling as well. So I support the concept of succession planning for volunteer groups. Township is probably pretty good value in the end, but I support your point of view about how we put it, where we put it. And that's where I'll get back to the point about if we're concerned about the matrix, how we're going about what we decide upon, that's another story. And how much we fund in budget time, that's another story to your point. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Councillor Cody, you wanted to weigh back in, and then I'll go to Deputy Mayor Lackey.
Great, thank you, Your Worship. Well, there's no, I don't want any mistake that Laffer isn't one of the critical volunteer organizations in this region. That's not my point. My point is, succession planning, you would want to open the door to every volunteer group that's in the region. And after listening to my esteemed councillor to my left, maybe we do. So I'll stand down.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you. Yeah, unfortunately, I get volunteer groups. They come and they go. If you don't have a passion for it, you're not going to do it. I'm really not in favor. I would sooner see this money go to retention and of the fire department rather than our groups. We're getting down to firefighters. We don't see that succession planning in fire department. So I don't understand. We're going to do it for beautification groups, but we're not going to do it for our essential services. Funds are better spent somewhere else.
So that's a different discussion altogether, Deputy Mayor Lackey, because what's on the floor right now is whether we fund this or not. I'm not saying your point isn't well taken, but that's a different discussion. That's not pertaining to, and maybe if you wanted further clarification, we could get further clarification in regards to funding for the fire department and what they have budgeted for retention services. And I don't know that number off the top of my head, and the chief is on call. Yeah, and Councillor Olkey, I'll recognize you after Councillor Rob.
Thank you, Your Worship. This project has come up before us before, and I said at that time that it struck me as very odd that Laffer is asking for something that's in the purview of this council, and that is a consultation. Who were they consulting for $8,000? Was that in the proposal? Like, we're being asked to spend $6,000, and I really don't know. It's a consultancy, it sounds like. That's our purview in here. That's Lansdowne's part. It's a settlement area within the great municipality. I don't know why a settlement area is asking for a consult to come in for $8,000, and why we're funding about 3/4 of that instead of half. So I'm not really in favor of a settlement area being funded for what is a consultation. That's stuff that in this chamber right here, we'd be saying, okay, yes, we need a consultant for such and such project, and we do it all the time on special projects or whatever. But for Laffer, it seems to be a little too vague. I don't care how much wording is put in there. It's a little too vague, and I think it says that in their purview. If they want to come and make a presentation to us and say, we need you to do this, then that's the way that should be handled. Let them come in this room, state their case, then we can vote on it through our special projects or whatever. This seems very odd to me. It did months ago, and it does now. Thank you.
Go ahead, Ms.
And
Miller.
through you, Your Worship, thank you very much for the question, Councillor. It is similar to the strategic planning process that this council, I think, is hoping to accomplish, which hopefully we'll get to next year. And it was on our radar for this year, but owing to COVID, kind of got kicked down the road a little bit. But I think really what this organization wants to do is the plan that they came up with, they hired a local woman as a contractor or consultant to help build the plan that they're currently working off of, which was, I think, 15 to 20, if I'm not mistaken, or 16 to 21. They want to engage this same woman again to bring them through that same process in terms of, again, not things that they would push to us as the municipality to do, but activities that they can take on that would complement what we do. So again, I referenced earlier the horse festival, for example, or the scarecrow thing that we've got going on in the community right now is how do they build community spirit above and beyond what we have the capacity to do. So I think that's really the meat and potatoes of their request is a plan that not only addresses them as an organization in terms of the succession planning and how are they going to get there, but also activities and events and fundraisers that they can do to ensure their sustainability and contribute to the quality of life here in Lansdowne.
Further questions in regards to the report? Councillor James. Oh, sorry, Councillor Olkey. I apologize. Yeah, Councillor Olkey and then Councillor James.
I guess I'm the only one on the end of a wire, Your Worship, and thank you for recognizing me.
Sorry.
I'm going to agree with what I thought I heard Councillors Fody and Gorell say. This paragraph struck me as something from my old world, where we talked about succession planning, recruiting and stuff, and that was a very scientific and fraught process. I think in a community group like this, they're probably culturally aware of who they have, who they're likely to get. The communities are changing somewhat as people migrate here, so they will have potentially new recruits who are very keen on these communities, not just Lansdowne. I'd also suggest that perhaps the Chamber of Commerce could help them a lot with this, as well as our own staff, and I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Olkey, and then Councillor Jameson.
I know from experience in not-for-profits that it's sometimes hard to bring the science to the table, like the succession planning. So, but I think this is really more drilling down to a discussion about whether we have community grants at all, which is something I'll just lay out there in the context of looking at the next budget. Because when we get into the discussion that goes, no matter how you cut it into the weeds, then we are basically saying we either don't trust matrix or we don't want to fund other groups of community grants. It's a problem in itself. You put it in the budget and then you feel you have an obligation to allow people to apply for it, and then they apply for it based on a matrix if we trust it, and then we say, well, wait a minute, I personally question that. Well, that's fine. But the issue for us as governors is to whether we agree with the concept of community grants, and if we don't, then that should be the discussion, not whether, from my point of view, and I reserve the right to be wrong, but the whole business of allowing people to look at themselves and say, this is what I need help for, is fundamental to a grant process. If you don't want to do that, then maybe we don't do grants. That's a larger question that we should put on the table at budget time. I'll leave it at that.
Further discussion in regards to the motion that's on the floor?
So where are we? Do we put an amendment to this, striking that, a vote, or are we gonna vote on this overall?
You have the ability to amend the motion, if you so wish.
Then I'll throw out that I would like to amend it that the Lansdowne Association be encouraged to come before council and make their ask through a deputation, and we can defer it for now from this proposal.
So the motion, the amendment is moved by Councillor Burrell and seconded by Deputy Mayor. And the amendment is that we ask that LAFR come forward to council in a separate deputation to speak to their grant application for further clarity. Or, sorry, I'm paraphrasing here. I didn't, Madam Clerk, did you get that?
No, I was working on it, but.
What I'm actually trying to get at is we remove it from the grants altogether. They come to council, and council can make a determination from our reserve fund as to whether to fund this. It's just a subtlety, but it's one that I think is more appropriate than a study done from a settlement area.
So the motion to amend is by Councillor Burrell, seconded by Deputy Mayor Mackey, that LAFR come to council as a delegation to request funds.
Actually, what I was going to do, Madam Mayor, if you don't mind, that the request from LAFR be removed from the community grant submission.
And have them
And
encourage them to come.
Okay.
Okay. So I'll leave you that you've got it written correctly. I just wanted to make sure it was correct. So the amendment that's on the floor is to remove the Lansdowne Association for Revitalization out of the grants and encourage them to come as the deputation council. Can I have I'll call them question on this amendment? All those in favor of the amendment? Or, sorry, go ahead.
I need to understand that what you're doing is you're punting them out of the grant program, and you're saying, come to council and ask for money.
Yep.
Where's that going to come out of it if you approve it? Where's that money going to come out of it?
What reserve?
One of the many reserve funds that we have. One of the 12.
We got, I know we got all
Okay.
these reserve funds.
Okay, so I think that we're making this a bit more complicated than it needs to be.
Right.
So the fund, we can decide whatever fund it's coming out of when they come and do their deputation, if we're willing to fund it at that time. I don't think we need to get down into those weeds tonight. I think that's for further discussion, and the funds, we have not spent all the funds in the grant program. There's nothing to say that we can't bring it back and fund it out of grants if you wanted to. If you didn't, if you wanted to fund it out of a reserve fund, as Director Tyndall said today, we are the ones that decide what money comes out of where and when. So really, it's about the process by which we're asking them to provide further discussion about their ask is the process. Okay. Go ahead.
One other comment, and I apologize. Worship, I get what's going on here with respect to asking them to come. My concern about them, if you turn around and say, okay, we like it, we're gonna fund it, we're gonna bring it out of this fund, I think that opens the door more to challenges with every single reserve fund we have. The value of the grants program is that it keeps it inside a box that we already have. Now, if we're asking to take a look at this one, fine and dandy, as a little extra caution before we pass, I would still encourage my colleagues on council to keep it inside the grants program box so we aren't muddying the waters elsewhere with community groups getting money, because Sabara is going to be up here in short order looking for money for some other too. Let me just tell you, okay? Sorry, thank you.
Mayor, George has
Yeah. Councillor Oki, you have a comment? There we go.
Thank you, Your Worship. Perhaps a proposal to amend the amendment to the effect that we defer the grant pending further study from the or further representation from LAFR.
I think that's implied in the amendment that that they're coming to.
That's to keep it back in the box that Councillor Jameson suggested.
I think it's still within our purview at that time to put it back in that box. So I don't think we need to have the amendment to the amendment, but that's just my call as chair. But I appreciate your suggestion unless the table feels differently. Okay. Okay, so the amendment is moved by Councillor Burrell and seconded by Deputy Mayor Lackey to remove the LAFRA request out of the grants and move to a delegation to come before council for further discussion and then the decision at that time. So all those in favor of the amendment at hand, please signify. All those opposed, and it's carried. Okay, so we have to go back to the original motion and we have to amend that motion because we have to change the amount in said motion. So the committee of the whole recommend that council approve community grant disbursements in the amount of $16,560.55 because we're removing the $6,000 allotment as detailed in Appendix A in Community and Business Services Report number CDS 0230. So I need a mover and a seconder to amend that, do I not, Madam Clerk? So I have Councillor Fody and then Councillor Mealy. Okay, so we're voting on the amendment to the motion, which is amending the dollar figure from $22,560.55 to $16,560.55. All those in favor of that amendment? Opposed, and that's carried. So we have a new motion, which I believe that the clerk is printing out. Is that what you're doing now, clerk?
Trying to.
My chicken scratching there, good enough, that's for sure.
Yeah. If I print it over there, can you go get it for me, please?
Blacklands in there.
Oh, I have one.
It's fine. I just don't, I'm sitting here taking candy from the bed.
The right one.
Amended motion that's on the floor is that the committee of the whole, that's moved by Councilor Cody and seconded by Councilor Mayhew. The committee of the whole recommend the council approve community grant disbursements in the amount of $16,560.55 as detailed in Appendix A, Community and Business Services Report, number CBS-023-1. Any discussion on this motion? Seeing none, we'll call the question. All those in favor, please signify. All those opposed? And it's carried. Thank you. And I'll have the movers and seconders initial, please. Go ahead. The next motion that's on the floor is moved by Councilor Cody and seconded by Councilor Jameson. The committee of the whole recommends the council authorize pursuant to section 27 of the Ontario Heritage Act of the property located at 1113 Prince Street, Prince, Lansdowne be added to the municipal heritage register, and the committee will recommend the council approve the application for the heritage celebration grant received for 113 Prince Street, Lansdowne, for the repair work of the foundation and structure up to $2,500, and that the committee will recommend the council approve the application for heritage celebration grant received for 1084 Prince Street, Lansdowne, for repair and painting of existing windows and repair of the front steps up to $1,275. That the committee of the whole recommends the council approve the application for alteration to a designated heritage property for the property located at 1084 Prince Street, Lansdowne, to permit the alterations to the structure as set out in the application to the Municipal Heritage Committee, consisting of 1, repair and repainting of existing damaged windows, 3, 2, installation of proper exterior lighting, and 3, repair of damaged front steps. In addition of 113 Prince Street, Lansdowne, to the Heritage Register approval of heritage celebration grants for 113 Prince Street, Lansdowne, and 1084 Prince Street, Lansdowne. Discussion on the motion, that was on one floor. Deputy Mackey and then Council Cody.
Thank you, Worship, and I'm glad they've done it, but have they been informed what the implications are moving forward with that property?
Madam Planner, did you want to speak to the difference between having it designated and having it registered?
Thank you, through your worship. The property is only proposed to be listed, not designated, so it wouldn't need heritage committee or council approval for alterations to the structure or windows or paints. It simply puts it on the heritage register, which protects it from demolition and requires a notice to council if they do choose to demolish it. But putting it on the heritage register does make it eligible for grant opportunities. So yes.
So there is a difference between the two. I
Yes.
asked the same thing, because I know that it can be a onerous process, but that's if it's provincially designated, I believe.
So if it's designated, the other property that's in front of council for a grant, is 1084 Prince Street, is a designated structure, which means it's designated and protected under the Heritage Act. So any alterations to the structure based on the reasons for designation are required to have consultation with the Heritage Committee and be approved by council. But to be a listed structure under the Heritage Act only requires notification as it relates to demolition, but the benefit of that is it allows it to be eligible for grant funding.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Any further discussion on the motion that's at hand? Councilor.
Thank you, Your Worship. More of a comment than anything. I think the new owners of this building have brought to life the building itself and really enhanced central Lansdowne. I mean, that intersection is basically the center point of the traffic area of Lansdowne. They need to be commended. And we all know the personal sweat and toil that went on there for the last likely 6 months or more. And it's to their credit and to our enjoyment that they take an old building that some of us are fearful might be in demise at some day and disappear. So it's really nice when somebody moves in and is committed to put their literally sweat and money behind the project this large. What we're granting here through the Heritage Fund is peanuts compared to what they put forward themselves. I think it's they need to be commended for what they've done.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Lolley. Councillor Jameson.
Just want to comment how much I appreciated Mr. Mercier's report. It was very thorough, particularly taken with page 11, the and I never miss it, Hardware and Metal magazine from 1960. A really good article on customer service for 1916. Change a few little words, and it's 2020 in a nutshell. It was a very, very good article, and I appreciate the report very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jameson. Any further comments or queries in regards to the motion that's on the floor? Seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor, please signify. All those opposed, and it carries. I too would like to add my sincere appreciation to those who have purchased these buildings, who are putting the love and energy back into them. It not only revitalizes the community, but it also provides an example of what can be done if somebody decides to move forward. Now, the woman who bought the hardware store, I think has paid for this physically. She's had to have some surgery done to her hands because of all the manual labor. So, but she's recovering. I've just been following it on Facebook, so we wish her a speedy recovery because she is fully committed to coming back and finishing the project as she became counsel for the said funds. But never underestimate a woman with a project in an end in mind. So keep that in your back of your mind. So the next motion that's on the floor is moved by Councillor Cody, seconded by Councillor Jameson. The committee will recommend the council approve an expenditure of $450 by the Municipal Heritage Committee to acquire a set of early family photographs, including an amber type photos for the local museum. Discussion on the motion. Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you, being somebody who's dealt with photos over my lifetime, I was kind of wondering, whether these types of purchases should be part of their budgetary part of their daily wick to make sure that we do keep these photos around. But it sounds that these might even be glass slides by what I read in it. So I'm not really sure whether that's totally true, but those would be even more unique as that part of the world than some others. So just again, a budgetary thing, the committee's doing that.
Thank you, Your Worship. There is a budget line in the Heritage Committee. It's $500, but given some of the limits on discretionary spending this year, staff thought it was prudent to bring it forward to council for.
Any further discussion in regards to this motion that's on the floor? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor, please signify. All those opposed, it's carried. And yes, I see you, Councillor Lolley. I saw that you voted, yes. There we go. So we're moving along in our agenda. We're on to other business. In other business, I wanted to bring a timely matter up for somewhat discussion and possibly some input and direction from council if there is any. As you well know, that we have been receiving a number of calls and queries and quite concerned citizens in regards to a helipad that's being put in on Hill Island. And I wanted to make it known that our staff have been working feverishly to try and figure out where our responsibility lies and what, if any, obligations we have for both the property owner and property owners surrounding it. I am disappointed to report that we struggled to get some response from the federal government. We are in contact with our MP's office, who is working alongside trying to get faster answers. With COVID and people working from home, it seems to be more and more difficult to get a direct response from individuals at Transport Canada. But I know the planner has met with a number of concerned citizens. I was able to meet them briefly myself, but the Conservation Authority have been involved, ourselves, Transport Canada, and MNR, and a number of different agencies have been brought together. But really, it's not clear in our municipal guidelines. Because this is sort of unique. It's not something that happens very often, but we have had some calls. I believe the planner has been on calls with some lawyers from other jurisdictions who have experience in this case law, but I believe that we might need to further our own education on this. So I was looking for some input from councillors where you would like us to go with this, if anything. Councillor Cody.
Thank you, Your Worship. Some of the correspondence that I've had with some of the concerned citizens and some of the questions I've asked regarding such, as you stated, it appears that our township, because nobody's put a helipad here before, it's like a request for a launching pad for Cape Canaveral. So it's unique, it's never happened before, but at the same point, I think it's prudent for us to see where we stand legally. That's my feeling. I don't think we can just listen to both sides and take no action.
So you're looking for us to get a legal opinion as to what our obligation is as a municipality?
I think it's prudent for us to do that. I really do, because I don't think we can sit on the sidelines for something that's taking place in our jurisdiction and not know where we stand. I don't think we need to, or should, be taking just the word of outside sources, if you will. I think there's too much at stake here.
I'll recognize Deputy Mayor and then Councilor.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you, does the fact that we're in the frontline current biosphere come into play, because it seems to for everything else? Is that something that's been discussed? I mean, I don't know if you have that information now, but
I know that it's been part of the discussion. I don't know but this is, I think, maybe what Councillor Cody was referring to is that if we take a look at all the different parameters that we're surrounded by, whether it be CRCA, NR, Frontline Village Biosphere, Parks Canada, Crown Land, there's a number of different things that are in play here that, we really have never been approached in this respect, but we just keep getting told that it's out of our jurisdiction. But I think that we owe it to our taxpayers to make sure that we are acting in everyone's best interest. And if we have that, then we have a legal opinion one way or the other. Deputy Mayor Paul.
that's just, I'll be short. We have a helicopter business in our township that did their due diligence to find, a piece of property that wasn't intrusive upon, neighbors and kind of did the right thing. They didn't plunk it smack dab in the middle of 1,000 homes. They probably could have.
Fair point, Deputy Mayor. Councillor, maybe, sorry, I went through all of you in my head. Councillor.
Yes, and for you, I was going to reiterate that also, that we have helipad in our own borders here, and they have to go through quite a few stipulations, I'm sure, to actually have it there. And having said that, the gas plant well under consideration. I don't think they've changed the flywheel, which we also talked to them about when they did their presentation, to ensure that they have that, that they were going around that, just a sideline. But to Councilor Corral, who has an aviation history, not doing these lures. Anyways, wondering if you have any other insight into the same item that might be from your costs. I've read the letters from the lawyer from Toronto, and some of it was shuffled, particularly the second. I found very entertaining. And when you read the cards, which are the regulations that enact the act, the Aviation Act, in there is a section on heliports. And I am not an expert. I wasn't driving and around and licensing heliports, but they are different than airports. There's a separate section 5, I believe, that deals with the licensing. Now, my understanding is if you own private property and you are not creating hazards, et cetera, you can put in a helipad. But to put in a heliport, that's a licensed situation. So I would like, rather than, if we're going to proceed here, rather than rely on the Toronto-based lawyer, I would prefer if we had a letter from another source in aviation that could address specifically, are these people asking to license a heliport because now there are rules and they have to put forward a HOM, a heliport operations manual, and they have to go through that, perhaps. So, you're really getting into the weeds here, and this is stuff I don't know all the details, but it can't be that complicated either. Safety. And there are the type of helicopter, the type of heliport, and then it becomes what type of operation. Right? I do know exactly what they're proposing. It's pretty lightweight stuff. They just happen to have a lovely turbine helicopter. So would the regs, for instance, have an operational, because you're asking for a heliport rather than just making a log or landing on the road somewhere to do some aerial training or something like that? Are they planning on designating the heliport? If they are, then perhaps one could say that Transport Canada must regard the safety around it. And if they call it an HOM heliport, non-instrument approaches, it won't be used at night. But still, does it require a certain safety margin around there to lose an engine? This is a single engine aircraft. If you lose an engine, where you're going into the trees, you're going into the neighbors, you're going under the road, you're going into the parking lot over the sky. But maybe there are some rules there. So if we're going to proceed, I think that rather than just accept what was written by the lawyer from Toronto, very verbose, very pilot-like. I think that we would have to set aside a couple of bucks for another consultant to say, yeah, he's absolutely right, or there's wiggle room. I would just get back to the safety factor. Consistently, I would say you've got homes within so many feet, so many yards, so many meters. What is the contingency if a failure? And I don't care if it's turbine or not, turbine failure and you're not free. So that's why I do this. I'm not an expert on helicopters, I'm not an expert on home, I'm not an expert, and I'm certainly not an expert on public ports. But remember, don't use the word helipad if they're calling it helipad. That's a whole other category.
So I think that based on Councillor Grohl's points and based on what Councillor Foley has brought forward, I think the notice of motion is in order to direct staff for next council meeting to get our own opinion, legal opinion and specifics in regards to what the obligation is of the municipality, so that we can ensure that we are not missing any stone that needs to be overturned if need be. So I would assume that maybe at the next meeting so Councillor Foley is going to bring that notice of motion next week. Okay, for direction to staff. Thank you very much. Any other business that needs to be discussed? Have something, Mr. Mayor?
I have a little question here. Yeah. As many of you know, I talked to Steve Monte quite well for what it was for a virtual kind of event, so that's interesting. Dan Mountain Santa Claus Parade at this moment is going to go ahead, not sure how soon it will get. So just to let people know that that may still be happening. It's changed a couple times already, so depending on the COVID. And Steve, with COVID, case of COVID site is on my property that I actually need to look after on a daily basis, so they are having bumper crop lineups. I know they have been able to do 700 tests a day. And at K-Rock Center, the maximum is 350. So they have up their ante by quite a bit. And having been there and seen some of this, the cleaning status they are doing is immense. I have been very impressed to see how they are handling it and what they're doing and how it's all going. So hats off to all our first our frontline workers in that particular facility. They are doing a great job. One other thing that I keep seeing when I enter the building from the back door is all the extra material that's happening out here. I'm wondering the surplus office equipment, whether it has another home sooner than later, because even as a emergency exit with furniture and stuff like that, which I'm also conscious of, it could be a hazard to emergency exiting of this building. So if at all possible, I'd like to see that addressed. Thank you.
I believe the charge agreement is going to ensure that that's taken care of. Okay, thank you. Any other business?
Gord.
Oh, I'm sorry, Gord. Thank gosh, somebody's looking at the screen. Go ahead, Gord.
Thank you, Your Worship, and another voice from out in the wilds of West Kingston. Okay, 3 quick points, and they're just points. The first one is to do with rumor control and the Wiltsey Creek group. There was a sense from certain persons in that group that if there was inundation of the farmland at the western end of Wiltsey Creek, that the Conservation Authority would declare the land wetland and it would be lost as farmland. And that rumor was fairly persistent. I checked with the Conservation Authority. They have no such power to do that, not at all. But that rumor may persist. If anyone hears it, it just isn't true. Okay. Now there may be ideological people in conservation authorities that would encourage the province to do that because they're the only people who can, but the conservation authorities by themselves cannot make that edict. The next thing, I'm just asked to make a statement regarding washrooms in Lyndhurst. They say that this is from Chamber of Commerce people, their tourist season begins before the 24th of May and goes until after Thanksgiving. Just a point. They're not happy with the weekend washroom situation. They feel they lose business because they're closed. And the cleanup in Seeley's Bay recently, a number of residents have expressed gratitude and appreciation for our staff who responded quickly and promptly. And they also appreciate that they got back to them on communications. So thanks very much. Well done to the staff. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I do believe that there is a meeting with some staff in regards to Wiltsey Creek here in the near future with the minister and Conservation Authority. So hopefully we'll have some more updates coming in the near future, at least for clarification on where that might go. Any other business? Seeing none, we'll go to notice of motion. So notice of motion, I believe, is already been identified by Councilor Foley in regards to a legal opinion for the health court. We're going to use the right term, I should say. Any other notices of motion? Okay, so my mayor's update. This week is my regular crazy week, which is town council tomorrow morning and the joint services on Wednesday. The big thing that I would like to make sure that everybody is aware of is that we continue to push at the the county level in regards to railway crossings, which have now become the thorn in my side, and rightfully so. We've been trying desperately to try and get that sorted out for way too long, but I have heard anecdotally, I have not confirmed this, that it will be fixed, much like the Lynn Road crossing, if anybody's been down that way. That is the goal and slated for next year, and I will try to confirm that, as that is important information for people to extend their patience even longer than they've had. So that is the hope going forward. Just speaking to the point Councillor Olkey made in regards to cleanup in the settlement areas. So without getting into specifics, I know that our bylaw officer has been attending properties in the settlement areas on a regular basis. It is a slow process, you know, and I do appreciate that people are frustrated with the state of certain properties. But some of the stories that I've heard recently about what our bylaw officer has encountered, having to have ODP with them, just the state of how people are living is quite unfortunate. There's children involved, there's difficult circumstances involved, and I must say that I know the planner went on a ride along recently, which was an interesting choice of day to do that. So she learned a lot, saw a lot that day. But the good news is that we have great partners at the health unit, at the OTP, at all the different organizations that back us up, and we appreciate their professionalism, and I know we appreciate the professionalism of our bylaw officer who takes her job very seriously. And I think that we're seeing the benefit of the long-term goal here, that some properties are being cleaned up and some have been sold, and you know, this is good news for the municipality because they are getting cleaned up. So the other very, very exciting thing, which we haven't, I don't believe we put out our press release in regards to this just yet, in regards to the Auditor funding, but we have been successful through phase 1 for the infrastructure funding for the province, which is very exciting in regards to broadband and running broadband, reliable fiber optic broadband to TLCI in all corners of the municipality. So, yes, and I'd really like to extend my appreciation to Councillor Burrell and William Fry, who are in that advisory committee, as well as some other ancillary individuals that are helping us as well, along with our planner, our CAO, and our other staff that are championing this project. And it is always interesting. There's a lot, we've received a number of calls since this has happened. All of a sudden, we seem to be very interesting to a lot of companies. So I'm just very pleased that we've had those champions, and thank you, Councillor Brown, and your sidekick, Mr. Brown, and all the hard work that you've done to push us to get to this point. So I'm equally pleased that as council, the last meeting we were here, we were already made the decision to move forward with the business plan, and we had received that information that we had been successful through phase 1. So we are already committed to that process. So I'm pleased that we have that foresight on the table, whether the province was behind us or not, we were still moving forward. So I think that shows a commitment to our municipality as a whole. So sorry, I need to go to my list, but I don't forget some things here. This is Agricultural Week in Ontario. So the 5th to the 11th, it's time to celebrate our producers, our foods, our farmers, and all the people that keep the food supply safe and in transit. So if you ate today, thank you, farm. Reminder that the public, the office will be closed for Thanksgiving Monday, which is October 12th, and council will be on October 13th, so that's the Tuesday evening, so we'll be 1 day delayed. Also that all municipal parks will be closed after Thanksgiving weekend, and that is a pretty standard procedure for the department. And there are 2 public meetings next week for zoning amendments. Our website to look at those zoning amendments. And also the fire services are recruiting, and they are looking fiercely for new members, and you don't have to be young, spry, and as, you know, they're willing to take Councillor Jameson, so they'll take just about anyone.
Deliver chocolate.
Yes, I'm just grateful that people are willing to volunteer and take on that role for our community, and hopefully we can find some other people who are willing to dedicate their time and energy into that and giving back to their community. So if you know somebody who's interested in fire services, please direct them to our website or to someone on the fire department who can attend to appropriate needs. So are there any other announcements? Go ahead.
Not Mayor, to you. Just on the one thing that you mentioned about the rail crossing and what they're going to be doing in the future. Is that a line item on the county budget, and will it keep them on track better if it did?
It's not a separate line item, it's under general maintenance, but my understanding is that the way that it's a coordination effort, which is the difficult part because they have to coordinate with CN. And then they also have to have approvals from Transport Canada and what have you. So I spoke to someone who works on the railroad, and our tracks are pretty much pooched here. At one point, those rubberized tracks were actually quite great, but the pavement in between is the county portion. The rubberized part of the rail is the railroad, and so it's this constant back and forth. So the good news is that the railroad has identified the safety issue there, and they have it on the list. I do note that I believe Blue Mountain Road received Cliff Road received new railway ties, so the spikes are out. I haven't been over County Road 34 recently. I believe the ties are at Blue Mountain, and I haven't been over town line. So if anybody is out there, if they want to report back, let us know, because I know that they were getting for air. So, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Worship. Can we also reiterate to the county and the railroad the damage to our fire trucks and the potential future damage to our fire trucks? If they want to pay the bill, and by all means, even the way they are, they want to buy us some new trucks.
Well, I think that I made that very clear at the last meeting, but I'm happy to continue to be the squeaky wheel. I'm assuming you're going to take over Roger Haley's seat for that. He's been on about train whistles with counties in the village of Lansdowne for quite some time. I think he's at 3.5 years or something, but he's just getting it sorted now. So that doesn't give me a whole lot of promise, but I'm not going to give up. As I said before, I was pretty clear with staff there. We do have an acting director of operations at the county level right now. They have gone through the interview process. They did not find anybody successfully through that process, so they're going back to the drawing board. So Bill Guy is the acting director of public works at county. If anybody is looking for a contact, please let me know. Are there any other questions, queries, announcements before we tie this up? Seeing none, I'll put the motion on the floor. Moved by Councillor Jameson, seconded by Councillor Cody. The committee as a whole adjourn. All those in favor, please signify. All those opposed, and motion is carried, and the meeting is adjourned. Thank you.